Welcome to another edition of the Radio Coffee House Show, where Jesus meets coffee meets talk radio. And the next one starts right now. How's it going, everybody? Clint Armitage with the Radio Coffee House, doing another Roadshow, and I'm out in the wilderness today, out in beautiful Dulzura, California. Again, out in the wilderness. So you're going to hear some things today on the Roadshow. You're going to hear the tarp that's above me. That's going to be moving in the wind because it is blazing hot out here. So I need to stay under a tarp in order that I don't melt out in this heat. So, again, we're out in Dulzura, California. We're having a good time here. And again, it's a radio road show. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about God's peculiar things and God's unusual things. Why does God have peculiar things? Why does he have unusual things? Well, you're going to find out that the unusual things and the peculiar things are the things that he uses to draw people closer to himself. And we're going to hear about that right now in this next episode. So let's get to it. All right, what's up, everybody? Again, Clint Armitage Radio Coffee House coming at you live. Just kidding. We are recording this in Dulzura, California, out in the heat, out in the wilderness, under a tarp, with the birds, with the bees, and it is beautiful outside. It's just super, super hot, so I hope everybody's staying cool right now. Again, going back to our topic, it's called God's peculiar and unusual things. Now, he uses peculiar and unusual things to draw us to him. So let me liken that to something here. Remember Ripley's Believe It or Not? Well, Ripley's Believe It or Not, when I was a kid, it was big, and it's still around today. There's actually 80 plus attractions of Ripley's Believe It or Not. They host more than 12 million guests annually. So what Ripley's Believe It or Not is this. It's an American franchise founded by Robert Ripley, which deals in bizarre events and items so strange and unusual that readers might question the claims. Originally, it was a newspaper like panel, but it got so popular that it expanded to different things, even radio. It went to television, comic books, and then now a chain of museums, which is where you get to see the Ripley's Believe It or Not all around the different parts of the country. Again, it's bizarre events and items so strange that you might even question that it's even real. So how does God do that? What does God do when it comes to something like that? Well, basically, God uses unusual things, again, to draw us closer to him. And God wants others to be able to see him through these unusual things. And we're going to be actually talking about Moses and how God used an unusual thing to draw Moses to him. And then God used that for Moses to find out what his calling in life is, one of his purposes, and that was to lead the Israelites. And God used an unusual thing, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But God wants others to see unusual things to draw him closer to himself. One of those peculiar things or unusual things is us, humans, people. He uses people. It is very clear that God uses people for his work. And he uses us all the time, especially if we are willing to be used. You will be used if you are willing to be used. You're open, you're flexible, you're willing to do God's work. He's going to use you, guaranteed. And so how can we be the unusual thing that draws people closer to God? Simple. Our abilities, our uniqueness, and our purposes are all unique and different and peculiar and unusual. So we can use our abilities, our spiritual gifts, our talents, the thing that God gives us that is unusual and peculiar because no one else has it like you do. We can use that to draw people closer to him. Then when they get drawn closer to him through your abilities, through your uniqueness, then God speaks to them. See, first he draws people's attention to something unusual. And then after that, he speaks directly into their life because he has their attention. That's what it does. It draws them closer because you're like, hey, that's unusual. And you start focusing on it. And then God can speak to people when they're listening, when they're attentive to what he's trying to say. So he speaks directly into their life because he has their attention. Then he helps them identify their spiritual abilities, if they're willing, if they're open, if they surrender to him. He shows them their superpower. just like you showed them your superpower when you drew them closer to God, or God did that through you. And then he gives the person their operational or eternal mission. Like I talked about before, you have operational missions, and then you have your eternal mission. And God will use your spiritual abilities and your natural abilities and all the things he's given you, the uniqueness that you have in your personality, in the way you think, in the way you look, in the way you do things, and he'll use that to draw other people to himself, because it's a gift that you've been given. Your uniqueness is a gift. Your difference is a gift. So embrace it. Don't shy away from it. Don't try to put it out that you're different than people. No, embrace it. God is using it for his good pleasure. Okay? So we want to be like that, because God uses things that are opposite of the norm to draw you and everybody else closer to him. That's why it's unusual. That's why it's peculiar, because it's not the norm. And so we get drawn to that. Now, the unusual thing could be a miracle. It could be your special abilities that you have, or it could be just you doing what you're supposed to do. And the Lord uses that to draw people to him. Remember the burning bush with Moses, the situation with Moses in the desert after he's been out in the desert for a long time. He's a fugitive, and he took off because he killed an Egyptian when he was younger, and he took off because he knew Pharaoh was going to go after him, so he was a fugitive, went out to Midian, and then he's basically becoming the shepherd, right? And he's older now. Now he's like 80 years old, and God's going to use an unusual thing to draw him closer and to give him his eternal mission. So let's get into Exodus 3, and then we'll start and we'll just read through, break it down a little bit, read through. We're going to go through Exodus 3 here. Here we go. Verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. This is how God draws Moses to himself in order for him to give him his mission. Now, see, you can see it's a peculiar or an unusual event, and Moses notes this. He looks over and sees a bush that was on fire that is not burning up. So he thinks, hey, I'm going to go over there. This is strange. I got to check this out. Why isn't it burning? It's not working in the normal pattern that people are used to. The fire should be consuming the bush, but it's not. That's peculiar. That's different. That's unusual. This is the same way that God can use you and your spiritual abilities to draw people to himself. And not because you are the same as everybody else. It's because you're different than everybody else. It's because you're unique. It's because you have this fire, this passion that is so out of this world. It is supernatural, and people are drawn to it. Why? Because God is in you. God is working through you, and you're open to it, and you're ready, and you're willing, and you just want to give it out. So this is the unusual event, and God uses this miracle to draw Moses. Well, what is God using in you? How is he using you to go out and draw people? Think about it. If you're open and willing, you're going to get this supernatural power. God will reveal some things to you, and then he's going to put you to work. He will put you to work because he's working all around you. He's literally working all around you. It's just we don't see it, but he is, and he's going to put you to work. So you got to be open to that, okay? So anyways, Moses gets drawn to this bush. Now we're going to go on from there. Verse 4. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Okay, verse 4, we're going to stop there. We're going to talk about that because look what God does. The Lord saw that he had gone over to look, and then God called to him. There's another depiction of how it's going to work. You're going to be drawn to this unusual event, this peculiarness, or people are going to be drawn to this peculiarness of whatever the event is or your abilities or whatever. And then when they get drawn, when they actually step forward and are interested in what is going on with God, what God's doing, then God speaks to them. And he calls out to Moses from the bush and says, Moses, Moses. And you can see God calls you by name. Why does he call you by name? Because you have a specific calling. Yes, we as the church have a specific calling, but you as an individual have a specific calling. And this is where God is telling Moses his specific calling. So he calls out to him, Moses, Moses. And then Moses says, here I am. And then we're going to move on to verse 5. Here goes. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Okay, so this is the thing we want to understand. Even though God is calling you to him, you have to have reverence for him, okay? All right, verse 7. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, and now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Okay, this is where we can be a part of what God is doing. He says in verse 10, so now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So that's killer. This is where we're finding out Moses' mission, right? But then, okay, now this is where we come across this too, is the doubt that comes into this, right? But Moses said to God in verse 11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Okay, remember, Moses has been a shepherd now for 40 years in Midian, and he's been on the run, and he's a fugitive. So he has some fears. He has some doubt about going back, even though God called him to go back to the place where he committed the crime. Now he's a little bit fearful of that, but God had called him to it. So you have to be prepared that God may call you back to where you thought you were never going to go. You thought you had already finished what you were supposed to do in that area, or you burned bridges, or you did something that you thought, yeah, I'm never coming back here again. And then God brings you back. You know, that's actually starting to happen to me. I'm starting to get brought back to places that I never thought I'd be back in. And now I'm coming back to these places. And so we have to be prepared and be flexible and willing to accept God's calling in our lives. That's part of our accepting the purpose, because he's going to work through you in these different places. Now, Moses is doubting, and he's kind of questioning God on that. And then God says in verse 12, I will be with you, and this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. So God kind of tries to quell his fears by saying, okay, it's me. I'm telling you to do this. This is God speaking to you. Because we can get confused, right? We can start to think that, hey, is this God telling me this? Or is this me just making this up? I go through that too. Everybody does. We have doubts that, are we telling ourselves to do this? Are we doing this? Or is God doing this? And then God says to Moses right here, like, he'll make sure you understand that it's him, because stuff will happen that he has put in your mind, that he has kind of told you in advance that will happen. And so that's how you're going to know it's God. He says, I'll be with you, and this will be a sign that I've sent you. When you brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And so what he's saying is, it's guaranteed that you'll know who I am, because it'll be successful. You'll go in, you'll get the Israelites out. Now, he hasn't told Moses how it's going to happen. He just said, he gave him the end. Like we get in the Bible, we get in Revelation, God wins. We get the end information. We get the finish line, right? We know who wins this thing. He just doesn't tell us everything up until the finish line, but he tells us what happens at the end, just like he did with Moses right here. So he tells Moses to just go in, get out, and then when you get out, you're going to get back to this mountain, and you're going to worship at this mountain, and that's how you know. So as Moses is doubting there, he's doubting himself and he's doubting God's plan, God is still patient with him. And he answers Moses' questions and gives him a fact. This is what's going to happen. This is how you can believe me. And he lets him know it's going to work out. That's all God is saying. So God drew Moses towards himself, and Moses had no idea that God was going to call him on his life's mission. Just like we may not know when God calls you to your life's mission, your eternal mission, your operational missions. You may not know. You may be just clueless going through life, not even paying attention, and then God goes, hey, look at this unusual event. You're like, whoa. You go over there, and then bam, he gives you a mission. And then you're like, whoa, this is crazy. This is big, but I'm going to follow through it. Why? Because I know God is telling me this. There's so many things that is confirming. He's even confirming, saying, this is what will be the outcome of this. You just got to go for it. And as you start to go through the process of fulfilling your mission, God's going to open doors. He's going to close doors. He's going to introduce you to people. As a matter of fact, me being here in this area right now, I was introduced to someone I knew years ago that I haven't seen in 30 years. probably. And now I saw him again. And I was like, what is going on? God has to have something with this encounter. And so I'm going to try to figure that out. What is God telling me about this encounter? And so it's been awesome to meet up with this guy that I haven't seen in a long time. And so I think God's going to use this for something special. So anyways, let's move on. Now, Moses did not know that he was going to get called on a life mission here, on one of his missions. And then the mission was to save the Israelites from Egyptians and bring them out of their bondage. God used an unusual event to catch Moses' attention. He caught his attention and then gave him his calling. Okay, remember, Moses was just living his life, right? And then what God is calling him to is literally to bring out over 2 million people out of slavery under a powerful regime. How can that be? Only God. Only God can call you to this huge mission. Only God can call Moses to that. And only God can call you to your unusual mission, because it's going to be unusual, just like this circumstance that called you and brought you to him, and that you may be used to bring people to him too. With the unusual event he's going to do through you. You never know. You have to be open and willing to accept it. Okay, verse 13, Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" So now Moses is asking, okay, what am I going to do? There's some questions I have here, God. You're calling me on this big mission, and I don't know what to do if they start asking me questions. I'm not an expert in this. I've never led a rescue mission. I've never led this many people out of bondage, especially out from under the government's hold. How am I supposed to do this? So he's trying to ask questions. This is the same thing I do. This is probably the same thing you do. But God, how do I do this? But God, how do I do that? How is this going to happen? And then God says to Moses in verse 14, this is what he says, because this is all he has to say. He says this, "I am who I am." This is what you're to say to the Israelites. "I am has sent me to you." That's it. God's name is it. That's all you have to say. God sent me. God's name be praised. Lift up the name of the Lord. It's God's name, God's presence. God is with you. We're going to finish it there. We're going to stop reading Exodus there because we're talking about Moses' calling. We're talking about your calling. How is God using you? How did he call you to himself? If he hasn't called you to himself, look for those peculiar things that he is doing in your life. Remember, God is working all around you. He is working right now in and around you. You just have to open your eyes to see it. I'll talk about that a little bit more in another podcast, but for right now, all you need to know is that God is with you. The I am is with you. And if he's calling you, if he is calling you and it's an unusual event, not a demonic event. Remember, you can back up everything. You can test every spirit and you can back up everything in the Bible. The Lord will show you in the Bible. If it's not there, if it's not part of the principles and the concepts of the Bible, then it's probably not of God. So don't get confused, but he allows you to test the spirit. So keep praying to him and keep open eyes, open mind to what God is doing, and keep your focus on him. And if you're already willing and ready, he's going to have you do some unusual events, peculiar things. And that's because your uniqueness is going to start to come out in the stuff that you do for him. That's going to be the spiritual abilities. He's going to increase your spiritual ability, and it's going to be able to speak to people. They're going to get drawn to you and ultimately drawn to God, because you're going to defer and say, "The I am sent me," just like Moses did. So you have to be ready, be willing, and be able to embrace what God is calling you to do. We have our purpose. We have our callings. We have our uniqueness. Let's use it. Let's do it. Let's change the world. Come on, let's do this together. I'm willing to go for it. Who's with me? My name is Clint Armitage. This is the Radio Coffee House. I am so glad that you were able to join me today. I'll probably be in another place, in another area, on the road, doing a road show, and I hope you're able to join me again. Until that time, stay safe, stay ready. God bless. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Radio Coffee House Show, where we're all about Jesus, coffee, and radio. We'll see you next time.